there's this experiment that this biologist did, and he created these butterflies. He made an artificial butterfly and he put it out in nature.
Ooh.
And he noticed that, so he made a mock female butterfly, but it was bigger, brighter, better, and the male butterflies started gravitating to the fake thing, and they stopped mating. And all of a sudden, that specific type of butterfly started to die out. And what he found out was, the male butterflies, they started like, having behavior that wasn't indicative of how they normally behaved. And so it's like this artificial stimulus. So I think the coin term is super normal stimulus. So there was a super normal stimulus because it doesn't exist. So it's super normal. And the whole idea behind that is, if you pursue something that you can't obtain, you're going to be insatiable for that thing, and that thing is going to lead to your detriment.
Wow.
I've been thinking for a while about the consequences of manipulative people who take control of a situation and use lies and deceptive tactics for their own gain, but the people that they are deceiving are, by and large, good people, and therefore the outcome is going to be slightly different than what is intended. This is touching on something that I talked about in my previous video, where I was kind of talking about how in these fundamentalist Mormon cults, the women are very good-hearted in their intention to be holy and submissive and to be kind and gentle, and a lot of things that we would say in most circumstances are very good attributes. But because they're being fed a destructive narrative by the leaders of that organization, it ends up causing them to be victims. They suffer unduly, undeservingly, for their motivations. Their motives are good, but they are the ones who end up suffering because of that. And that was one example. But I think that there's kind of a broader example that we can see in our culture at large, and it comes out of this postmodernism and kind of woke identity politics kind of thinking. There's a certain sort of manipulative language that is the supremacist narrative that someone can put forth. This was the Nazi messaging, that the Germans were supreme and it put them in a class above and everybody else was inferior and they could be looked down upon. Bolshevik Revolution, it did the same thing because it was saying that the people who were on the bottom deserved to be on the top. But the problem is that whenever you're creating this conflict, which I suppose is always necessary in some of these sort of systems, it's going to be an evident and acceptable truth to one group because it benefits them, and it will be rejected by another group because it does not benefit them. So therefore, there always has to be some element of truth and actual goodness in the messaging, or it doesn't work. It doesn't sell to normal people. You couldn't sell a message that, we should all just become psychopaths and just murder everybody and do whatever we want. Like, that's like a meaningful experience for one person who's a serial killer, and everybody else hates that person has that idea.
On Twitter, people regularly say things like, and this just happens, it's constant. People say things on Twitter that are so outrageous, they would never say them even once face-to-face to anyone in their whole life.
So you have to sell an idea that has somewhat more of a mass appeal, and most people want to be loved and appreciated on the receiving end of things, and so you have to have these sort of positive virtues that are about love and acceptance and things like that. Now, I would say that with the postmodernism and the woke movement, there were evil and manipulative people at the heads of these movements. Michel Foucault, who was a pedophile and wanted that to be an acceptable lifestyle. And that's an evil motivation in which to seek to change the culture. And it puts an undue burden on everybody else to try to live under this damaging pattern of thought to accept all this stuff that, I mean, isolation is one thing, but once you start getting all these different people together, everybody can't accept everything for everybody all the time, because what I do affects you, and what you do affects me, and what somebody else does affects both of us, and there's all of our lives are interconnected, and so we have to have systems and rules that benefit all the people. Otherwise, it causes a lot of problems.
So she's making her own choices around this and trying to navigate the difference between beauty and self-esteem and, what would you say, health and athleticism in her own life in a way that makes her feel whole in a society that's insane. And the responsibility for the society being insane is partially us, because we've failed to define those terms sufficiently.
A manipulative person doesn't have any qualms about just putting forth that system that's going to benefit them the most, because they are selfish and manipulative. So they don't care about the consequences. But inevitably, what's going to happen is that there are going to be people who try to come up through these systems and are genuinely good people. You know, we always have to consider the impact between the nature and the nurture. And the nature, while I believe it is imperfect in every person, it's not altogether evil. It is a reflection of God and His way of doing things and His plans. And so there is good things that can happen, because even with somebody who has bad information, they're still capable of doing good things. But they might express themselves in a different way because they are accepting some false premises. I was thinking about this in regards to this Jordan Peterson video, and especially where they were talking about the swimsuit model, which I had already done quite a little bit of commentary on. And I think Jonathan Peugeot brings up a point that this was obviously a marketing thing, because they put forth a video of telling the girl and she was all excited and all that.
It wasn't only a subversion of beauty, but it was clearly a marketing decision on their part. They made a YouTube video where they show how they tell her that she's on the cover, and obviously everybody's surprised, and they're filming her being surprised because they know that this is a marketing ploy to virtue signal to the world.
So the point that Jonathan Peugeot put forth was that obviously this was a marketing ploy or a marketing strategy, because they had a video where they told the girl that she was the one that they picked for the cover, and that kind of tips the hand to what their intentions were. And I can say, oh, okay, sure, that's fair enough. But here's the thing I want to think about. Jordan, in his talk with Michaela that I really criticized, it kept going to these arguments about biological preference as the indicators of beauty standards in women. And those beauty standards obviously are hardwired into the male physiology. That's what men prefer. That's where it comes from. And that makes sense in a way, because as we say, opposites attract. And so, you know, it is the attraction of the man towards the woman that is the basis for this selection. And that's why we have magazines like Sports Illustrated. But, you know, he's also said that women whose selection of men is not so much based on the physical as it is on the social hierarchical status of success. Often the way that they are choosing is they're really letting the men decide and put forth the candidate. You know, and he gives this example of a mythological football game, and then the quarterback is the greatest of all the football players, and he's hoisted up on the shoulders of his teammates and ushered forth towards the cheerleaders, and this is the way that the males are selecting the greatest amongst themselves to subdue the woman and to claim his prize of mating, and those supporting him will, by virtue of his influence, be able to benefit themselves. But it's his accomplishments that are really doing the thing. And what was striking me is that maybe in a way this is a sort of a reverse of that in what's happening here, because I think we could all agree that this plus size model probably wouldn't have been chosen as the cover model in the 90s or the 80s or the 70s. This is a more modern thing. It's more relevant to what's going on in the current day. And Jordan wants to put all of this on this postmodernist woke identity that's forcing a standard of beauty. His reasoning that he had put forth previously was that we already have a standard of beauty, and it's this, this, and this, and these are the biological factors that are appealing to the man. Under that system, we're saying this is the standard of beauty, and you can't tell us what anything else is. Well, under that umbrella, the men are choosing the standard of beauty both for the women and for the men, because in his football mythology, it's the men who are selecting amongst themselves and putting forth to the women which man they should select. So that sounds like a rigged system in some ways. Now, I also think that any standard has to be dealing within a range of parameters, because if it becomes too rigid and too narrow, then that causes a lot of the problems we have now. And I'm glad that the other guy did bring out this porno culture. And it's interesting because he said, like, oh, are you blaming these women for getting this stuff done and doing these things?
Why aren't you going after women who get double D implants and enter porn?
Yeah, right.
And your answer to me was, well, they're not causing a wholesale industry of whatever to happen.
Right, but they are fomenting a porn revolution that's decimating sexual behavior among young people.
And that was my point to you.
Yeah,
it's like,
absolutely.
Okay, so fine.
Jordan did talk about that it's really ruining the young minds and the sexual appetites of the upcoming generations. But that's another indication where I would say nobody's blaming women for women getting breast implants and looking like porn stars, or that we have porn stars that look a certain way, because all of those women were also selected according to standards put forth by men. So what bothers me is that most of the pushback, or those who have agreed with Jordan on this point, and I think it is categorically different than Elliot Page and the Supreme Court justice, because for the most part I agree with Jordan's reasoning behind those things, and honestly it doesn't bother me if people think his tweets are mean regarding those either. But I think with this one he was mistaken, and saying that Michaela doesn't feel sorry for her, so that's not a big thing, because what I think we're seeing in this is that this is the fruits of postmodernist wokeism and feminism, which maybe were set forth for bad reasons.
If the Bolsheviks introduce communism, right, and I think, oh, that's gonna mess up the Russians, and the Russians are my competitor, so I'm going to add some communist propaganda. That's not me taking down Russia.
Correct.
Right? That's me amplifying.
Correct.
The question is, did this woke revolution come from somewhere? Did somebody have a meeting and say, look...
Oh, you're talking about the genesis beyond Foucault, Derrida, Lyotard. You're talking about the way that was...
I'm saying I don't want to assume that I know why the West is deliberately, it would seem, tearing apart every functional structure and replacing it with a fairy tale, right? But
I don't even think they're replacing it with... That's way too much credit. What are they replacing it with? Chaz. I mean, what are they replacing it with?
That's a fairy tale. That people
a dystopian
can,
one, but okay, I guess I'll give it to you.
The idea that you can get rid of the police and civilization will get better is a fairy tale. It's bullshit, as fairy tales tend to be. So my point is, look, I don't know if wokeism is organic in its inception, and some enemy said, hey, look at this. If we can get the West to embrace this stuff, we won't have to fire a shot. That's possible. Or it's possible that it came from some enemy to begin with.
But when these ideas are presented as truth to a generation, good-minded people will take those things as true, and they will apply a different filter of what it means to the circumstances. And so what I think is that, because behind feminism, too, is this thing of liberating women, liberating them for their own sexual freedom, which, guess what, benefits the men, because then women think that casual sex lifestyle is empowering when it's really not.
Abuse, infidelity, men refusing to commit to women and abandoning their families. All of these problems are caused by patriarchy.
Well, I think defining terms is important.
Therefore, we need to destroy the Christian church and its patriarchal dogma.
Are you kidding me? There's only one institution left on the face of the planet that is actively, aggressively teaching men to treat women with dignity and honor. Who's teaching men that loving your wife as Christ loved his bride means never ever abusing her in any form? The church. What's the only group in the world telling young men, don't ask a woman to give her body to you if you won't give your name to her, marry her, commit to her, love her and cherish her, and fulfill your Christ-like duty of protecting her from those who would harm her? The church. If a man gets a woman pregnant out of wedlock, what's the only voice left in the whole universe telling him, hey doofus, quit playing Call of Duty until 3 o'clock in the morning, get a real job, and live your life in service of this woman like a real man? The church! Hey, men, God will condemn you for all eternity if you don't stop choosing lust over having a meaningful, divinely blessed relationship with an actual woman. Would you like to avoid that condemnation? Then quit napalming your dopamine receptors on pornography, don't watch sleazy movies, halt all visits to strip clubs, and immediately cease and desist all patronization of restaurants where some 19-year-old girl at the lowest point in her life serves you overpriced beer and extreme chicken wings while wearing a halter top and atomic wedgie shorts. What's the only institution left on the planet telling men this? It's the church. Good gimlet gravy, lady. We're on the same side here. Why are you convinced that we're somehow your number one enemy?
Because you keep mansplaining. This is why you Christians are the worst. My boyfriend isn't a Christian, and that's the reason he never mansplains to me.
He doesn't?
No, he just refuses to marry me after 7 years of dating and says that if I ever get pregnant, the most I can hope for is that he'll go halvesies with me on an abortion. I'm so lucky.
Basically, in all these things where they try to prop up women, the women lose. But every once in a while, it's going to have some impact the other way. And this is one where I'm saying, what is the selection team of selecting models at Sports Illustrated? I guarantee there's a lot more women working on that team than there was 10 years ago and 20 years ago and 30 years ago. And originally, as I talked about in the other video a ways back, it was the guy's idea. He was a marketing guy, and it was not about athletic bodies. It was about fashion models. And it was something for when there wasn't a lot of sports activity to put this issue out. That was the whole idea. So what I think we're seeing is that, in some sense, the women are in charge now of deciding who they can put forth as what is beautiful. And I think that we need to have some amount of acceptance of the fact that diversity in beauty is a good thing, because we could say there was one woman who was so outstandingly beautiful in her natural, her appearance, her face, her body, etc., that was so beautiful that all the men agreed she was the most beautiful woman. But now that we have all these ways by which people manipulate their looks, some of them more mundane, some of them more permanent, everybody's going to try to look more like that one ideal woman. Well, then what do you have? You have a sea of identical women who are all the most beautiful. But then what has been removed from beauty is the concept of uniqueness. And so to have uniqueness of beauty requires that you also have diversity of beauty. We want to create a binary in this regard. We want to say beautiful woman and ugly women, or beautiful women and ugly women. And those are the categories. But it's not so simple as that, because there are so many different factors. You know, if there was one woman that was the perfect in all the factors, she would be the most beautiful, but all the other women would have different strengths in those other factors, and they wouldn't all be the same. And I think, you know, this woke thing is saying like all bodies are beautiful. Well, they are in a way. Some of them are more suited to being displayed on magazines than others. I think that we're also, you know, coming to a place where, and this is why I fundamentally don't disagree with Jordan's tweet on this issue and not the others, is that, you know, feminism was a lie that pushed people in a certain direction. But many of those people were good people, and they held on to the good intention behind that bad belief system and took it a certain direction. And the same thing is probably true for the woke and anti-racist things and for the postmodernist critique of things, because there's elements of truth in all these things. And there's some people that are going to, if it's just by the nature of their personality, they're going to look for the good and virtuous aspects of those things, and that's what they're going to put forth. Whereas I think the founders of these movements were looking at the exploitative parts of it that they purposefully sought to take advantage of. Eventually, though, these different streams are going to converge, and there's going to be conflict between them. And I think you start to see this in the sense of, you know, now there's, I don't remember what the term is, but there's the feminists that they're for women, but they're only for biological women, and they're upset about how trans women are taking away opportunities that rightfully belong to women. Of course, this is something that has been expressed a lot in the area of sports. Say Sports Illustrated probably is a very woke corporation in some ways, and they have had transgender athletes that they try to pretend are real women, and they've had transgender models that they try to pretend are real women. And that's why I was most upset about Jordan, is that that's the categorical line, is men that pretend to be women. I don't even know if you noticed that the year before that the model on the cover was a biological man, because he has a very feminine appearance, and he actually fits a lot of those criteria that Jordan describes as being beautiful. But that is a much more egregious thing to me, and much more harmful, to say what matters most is what your physical appearance is, more than your reality, because that is what's very harmful to women. And that's the problem with the transgender athletes as well, is that it's saying like, oh, this woman is the strongest woman in the world because she's actually a man. It's one more way where men are deciding for women what all the rules are going to be. So I would say in that sense, you know, the women were victims in the feminist movement because it had the selfish interests of men at its heart, or that's who gets the most advantage of it. But some of the people who are following along with this, and who are going to college and being told that a woman is powerful, and you know, you have just as much opportunity as men, and now probably more and more opportunities for career advancement, and lo and behold, women get into positions that were previously held by a bunch of chauvinist men, like picking the models for Sports Illustrated. And some of these women are going to say, let's try to pick some women that show a diverse range of different types of beauty. And one thing that I've learned from being married is that women and men notice different things about women. And there is something to, you know, what a woman perceives as being beautiful that's different from just, it's definitely much less to do with the body. It's a lot more to do with their face, how they dress, how they present themselves, the skills of being feminine. There's been many times where my wife has pointed out that a woman is very, in her opinion, very beautiful, and I would say, oh, okay, I didn't realize that. If you train yourself to try to see what the other person is seeing, you can see that they're right. It's just not the same obvious things that men notice, which is, typically enormous breasts. So, that's like the one category that a man will use to decide who's the most beautiful. Don't even notice if that woman has a lazy eye or she's missing an eye, or, how many teeth are crooked or whatever, if we're distracted by dominant feature. This may be some of the way that things are going forward. To categorically say that this is this, woke concept of enforcing a certain standard of beauty on us and blah, blah, blah. Men have been selecting their standards of beauty for a long time, and they've been putting their attention and their money in those ways, and what it has produced for the most part is a pornographic vision of femininity. And I think that that's very detrimental because it is causing a lot of crisis in actual interpersonal relationships between men and women. This is something I talked about recently in the blog I wrote. Christian guys who can't get a girlfriend because they don't have the status to compete should consider one of these mail order bride services, because chances are they will treat that woman better than most of the typical clientele if they did it as a purposeful, conscious choice. And that's kind of a weird idea. There's so much problems between how men and women are deciding to select who they want to pursue a relationship with, and they're not being very successful with it overall. And so it's getting to the point where having a relationship at all is a marker of an elite status. And that's not good, because that will definitely cause real damage as our population declines. And a big part of this is that people just can't be honest with each other. Men can't be honest about what they actually want because of pressures from men and women can't be honest about what they actually want because of pressures from men and women. And so basically, everybody pretends they want a bunch of stuff that they don't want. Nobody gets what they want, except for a couple super successful guys that basically fulfilling the dream of the founders of these movements by taking advantage of a system that puts a burdensome mode of thinking on people. Yeah, maybe it was a marketing ploy, but maybe we need to be marketed some different things. We need to think about these things in a different way. One of the things that gives me confidence is that I think that Joseph said to his brothers at the end of Genesis, what you meant for evil, God has intended for good. If somebody starts a movement that's supposed to benefit them by causing them to be able to manipulate people psychologically, cause this cognitive stress, and thereby they become victims, eventually at some point it's going to backfire, at least to a certain degree. And then we will have some unforeseen new expression of truth and beauty and goodness that comes forth from that. This could be a way that perhaps our society could improve. Because the real thing is that on a desert island, one man and one woman, on that island, it's the most beautiful man and the most beautiful woman, because there's no comparison. And I think that that's the Christian ideal of what marriage should be. In your marriage, which is why God created men and women as male and female, there is no other. You're not meant to be comparing your spouse to others. And so you see them as the most beautiful and the best. And if there are things that they could improve, you are only wanting them to grow for their own good and into the best possible version of themselves, not to become something that they're incapable of doing. And so that's why I think that comment probably caused as much sort of damage as what he claims Ellen Elliot Page was doing with her tweet, because women who maybe would have seen that woman and said, "Oh, I have felt like I'm disqualified as being beautiful because I have extra weight or some other flaw," could say, but if that woman can achieve that status of being on the cover of Sports Illustrated swimsuit, then perhaps I am valuable and desirable. And what Jordan's message basically says is, no, you're not meeting the standard. And so that woman who maybe weighs a little bit more, is a little bit bigger than some of the other girls, might instead go and look at the transgender movement and say, I have more weight and more muscles than a lot of girls, so maybe I should become a man. Maybe that would be my best purpose, because it would be easier for me to succeed in being a man than in being a woman. If being a woman means being lonely and single, if you're not at the height of physical attractiveness. It just struck me differently thinking about that way. Women probably aren't the ones that are complaining about women being the ones deciding who gets to be beautiful. And so maybe the men should just shut up and, hold their thoughts to themselves. Nobody's going to compel you to ask a woman out that you don't think is beautiful. But if you keep getting turned down by the ones that you do think are beautiful, maybe you should reassess your own standards a little bit.